we have Samuel from Illinois who wants to make a philosophical and scientific argument for God. Samuel, are you there?
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I do. I'm sorry.
Good. You want to make a philosophical and scientific argument for God?
Yes, I do, actually. I'm much of my training in school for undergrad physics. I had like a lot of interest in cosmology, and so I do also dabble in philosophy as well.
Okay, that's cool. Let's do it. This should be interesting.
Away.
Yes, I'd like to start with the philosophy. You've heard of Plato's school of the realm of forms, or Platonism?
Yes. Would you like to explain it to the audience, just in case they haven't, or would you like me to explain it to the audience? It might be better coming from your own words.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a professional on it, but I would say the gist is that essentially much of our concept of ideas and our concept, literally the concepts of things, inhabit a realm or dimension separate from the physical reality, and that us thinking about it is how we tap into things like mathematics, geometry, and language, that these things are independent from the physical world, and that Plato back then was trying to describe, I think, what he called the realm of the paleroma, which is where we essentially draw from these ideas.
Yeah, so to kind of clarify that, for people who want the kind of gist of it, the main gist of it, Plato said there was a realm of perfect forms. So every time we, for example, think of a circle, it is an imperfect representation of a circle. The only true perfect circle exists in this realm of perfect forms. Have I got that about right to your understanding?
Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, let's discuss it. Go ahead.
And so from that starting point, I think geometry is my base foundation. The fact that we can come up with geometry, and that despite there no concept of a triangle existing, and yet most of our ideas around photography, basic engineering, architecture is built on ideas that don't actually physically exist, is what really started to open me up to the idea of God. Because to me, whether it be a concept like love or compassion, there might not be a physical explanation as to why those things exist, but at the same time, I would consider those to be emergent properties that we are drawing from in that essential Platonist point of view, that despite there not being a physical explanation for love exists in a different realm that we interact with. And I think that aspect is one of the characteristics of a God.
Why do you think that? And, why do you think that's the case? And we have, because you've let me just clarify why I'm asking that here, because you've asked essentially for me, you've put two different points forward there. The first one is that things like love have no explanation. They're not physical things and they have no explanation, therefore God. And you also said geometry. And this falls into different categories for me, because the way I would explain it is, first of all, love does have an explanation. In fact, loves, the many different forms of love that we know of, have explanations. We know they come from the brain. We know they're emotional things. Friend of the show, Dr. Richard Firth Godby here, who wrote A Human History of Emotion, a very good friend of mine. I've known him for 20 years plus. He's written a book all about the history of emotion, where he talks about these different kinds of love. Neuroscientist Dr. Dean Burnett wrote a book called Emotional Ignorance, where he specifically talks about love and how it comes from the physiology, the brain, the nervous system, and the different kinds of love. So on that point, you've completely lost me, saying that it's not a physical thing. On the geometry part of it, where I think is you're going back to this realm of perfect forms from Plato, I think there are arguments against that. And I think, I think one of the stronger ones was put forward by Bertrand Russell, I think it was. And we can go into that shortly. But I'm really interested in why you think they are evidences or proofs for God in themselves, when one seems to have an explanation anyway. From the experts in the fields who talk about that certainly believe it has a physical explanation, and the other one is certainly philosophical considerations which we need to take into account. So why do you think that the realm of forms proves God? Things like geometry come from the realm of forms, and the arguments, specifically the arguments against those, aren't strong.
Yeah, and I should apologize for the love, because I'm a huge advocate for natural selection. So I could say that there are multiple physical explanations as to why organisms would have compassion or want to experience, social relationships with each other. I only offered that big one because at times I would say in a zero-sum universe, there might be pressures as to why we would pursue love as a broad concept as opposed to just self-interest. Even then, Richard Dawkins does talk about why you could be compassionate. I would say the geometry angle is compelling to me because I would say it's an example of an emergent property that has no physical reality, and yet the truth of it is so powerful that it does, in fact, influence the physical reality, if that makes sense. Like I said, there is no true triangle.
Argue with you a tiny bit, Samuel. Sorry, just because I think the way that I'm not an expert in mathematics, so forgive me. I read a lot and then I forget half of what I read, so I reread a lot. But I reread a lot on mathematics and the mathematics of the universe, and I've watched a lot of interesting documentaries on people who think that maths is related to mathliness is next to godliness, or however you might describe it. But my understanding of mathematics is descriptive of the universe. It's not as some separate separate property that doesn't have a physical manifestation, but rather it's a language that describes the physical world around us. So I feel like we're disconnected on that.
Well, and that's a school of philosophy. Is it a discovery or is it something that we invent? And my point of view is that I think it's a false distinction, that ultimately it's both something that we discover and something that is innate, because or something that we contribute. Because I think, and that ties into the land of forms, is that I think people are essentially a window into that, essentially, which is why art is like so powerful to us. When people make a beautiful artwork, I think they're tapping into something greater than themselves, but they also
why do you
are
think
the window to that.
Why is it, Samuel, that you think that? It's a nice thing to think. I just don't understand why.
Well, I think that because essentially when they're doing something like a sense of awe or appealing to something more, and I don't want to use the word divine, but something greater than themselves, I think that is, I think it is emotionally appealing, but I think it's also like a sign of something deeper innate to like consciousness itself. Because essentially, I don't know why people are oriented towards more radical concepts like both beauty and disorder, but I think that would help explain why. Because I think in their forms, separate from the physical laws and everything, things like order and chaos are just, absolute, and that we can choose between the two. But to have like there could be a physical explanation as to why we like music, and in the future that could be given. But as of right now,
we know lots of reasons why we like music, to do with the brain and the natural rhythm of the human body and things like that. There are lots of reasons. I feel like if this isn't, because I think you've got a really interesting approach and you're very nice about it. I think, Samuel, this might be a bit of a God of the gaps, just put in an interesting philosophical way.
Oh, no, and absolutely. But my appeal would be that it's not necessarily God of the gaps. I think that God and science are one of the same, that the physical constants and such, though, are manifestations of something intertwining with us, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, I mean,
this
this is
goes into
something
my
that
scientific-
Yeah, sure. I'll just
I'm
say
sorry.
that this is something that a conversation that I have with a lot of people, and something that I preface whenever I talk about religion. Well, most of the time when I talk about religion, because it comes up a lot. The concept of, like, whether via mathematics or cosmology or something of like the something greater being explained as God is really just a personal descriptor. It's just a distinction that I personally prefer, and I'm fine with you to feel that way. I'm fine with you to call that unknown God. For me, it's just a scientific unknown. What's the purpose of this idea? What does this do for us?
Well, and here's the thing, and here's the contradiction. Well, I wouldn't say it's a contradiction, but I would say that God wants us to be in a situation where we don't necessarily have to depend on him, but that we do appeal to higher truths as a way for us to self-orient ourselves, whether it be like through compassion for others, through empathy. Because when other religions say that you have to believe, it's almost used as a threat rather as a tool for us to come together. But
Is it? I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, Samuel, but my degree is in religious studies. I've studied lots of religions. I've been very fortunate, I consider myself, to have been a guest at Buddhist temples and mosques and lots of different churches. And I've never heard anybody really kind of outright threaten people that you've kind of got to follow them in a threatening manner. There's the kind of background, like underhanded, well, you might burn in hell forever if you don't kind of threat. But surely that's in Christianity as well. I've heard, I'm sure Emma has heard as well. Many Christians make that remark. Well, you'll burn for hell. You'll burn in ever for hell. That kind of threatening. And that's from Christians. I don't really hear anything. I hear that in some other religions, but I don't hear anything beyond that in other religions. I've certainly never been at a mosque, and I've never gone in pretending to be a Muslim, and I've never been in a mosque and somebody walk up to me with a gun and say, "You will convert or else." It's never happened. It's never happened. So I think you may be watching too much TV.
Historically, don't you think that's a bit disingenuous, though, that there has been instances of Muslim clerics and preachers of the past using...
Yeah, I think probably every religion has done it in the past, but from my personal experience interacting with these people, it's not something that happens every day. Do you not think it's happened in Christianity in the past, where people have been threatened that if you don't turn into Christian...
I'm not saying it's innate to any religion. I'm saying oftentimes... The reason why religion is so compelling is both the institution and the implicit threat of denying any one religion. Like, if you deny Christianity, you will go to hell. If you deny the Prophet Muhammad, you will be put to the stake. I'm saying that oftentimes religion does use implicit threats as a way to galvanize, loyalty to that religion.
That's a fair enough statement, Samuel. I'd just like to point out that's a fair enough take, but you did say that Christianity doesn't do this and other religions do, and that was the point I was making. That not all other religions do it. Like, it's just not a given in other religions that it happens. And when we look back historically, it's Christians also do it as well. So it's not particularly a good argument when you're trying to say, well, Christianity doesn't do this, other people do, because it's a bit nonsensical, really, isn't it?
But I'm not claiming Christianity is better for that reason at all.
Okay. That's certainly how it sounded. Anyway, let's move on.
Sorry. I think Samuel and Richard, you guys are just getting a bit crossed wires on that. I really would like to hear the scientific aspect of your offerings, please, Samuel.
Yes. So essentially has to do with cosmology and the nature of time, because a lot of my... Well, I shouldn't say a lot. Some of my studies in school was related to cosmology and Big Bang Theory. And essentially, you heard of like the concept that, time is an emergent property.
Oh.
Yes.
Well, it's a part, well, relativity, but essentially that mass and energy, when combined, are what allow for time to exist because it's an aspect of space-time itself. It's kind of relating from Richard Penrose's idea of, I think it's his idea of a cyclical universe, in that, and it's a relationship. It has its relationship with shapes, in that, and maybe I'm butchering this a lot, is that over a given enough time, especially as matter and energy dissipate over trillions and trillions of years, that they will essentially be a time where, because there's no reference point for how time should function, essentially there is no end point to time, and so infinity becomes, literally physically manifest, and that in relation to things like quantum fluctuations, you can get something like a Big Bang again. That's very reductive for what could be a much more in-depth explanation. But how I relate to that is that I believe that, have you heard of the concept of a Boltzmann brain?
I
Yes.
haven't.
Would you like to explain it for the audience and for people who haven't?
Me.
Yes, a very top. Yeah, a top-down explanation is that essentially quantum fluctuations, or just things like quantum fluctuations could recreate what could be considered a human brain, whether it be physical or just the electrical wiring of a physical brain, and that. However unlikely it is, because time is infinite, supposedly, which it has yet to be proven. Given enough time, you could essentially recreate the perfect replication of a human brain, even without a body, essentially.
Forgive me, Samuel, but weren't you talking about the scientific proof for God here? And as much as, Boltzmann's brains, and we can get onto the philosophy in a second, but Emma asked you specifically about the science, and when you jump into the speculative, then we're not really talking about the science anymore.
Or evidence.
Oh, yeah, or indeed evidence. You started talking about infinity and cyclical universes, and that confused me a little bit, because the prevailing theory in cosmology is the heat death of the universe. That, things are going to stretch out so much that the heat will essentially, it's why it's called the heat death. The universe started being infinitely hot from the that word that I can't remember, that little dot point thing, singularity is the one I'm doing that a lot today, I don't know why. The singularity from which universe came was infinitely hot and dense. It's cooled down, and it will cool down to such a rate that all the heat will be dissipated, the universe will stretch out that far, and that's why it's called the heat death. That's the prevailing theory in cosmology. So it's interesting to me that you're talking about scientific evidence. You're trying to present this as scientific evidence, but you're talking about a hypothesis which isn't the kind of mainstream accepted one by the majority of physicists. So what is it about the cyclical universe? Sorry, carry on, please.
Oh, yeah. I would say this is an argument the same way, prosecution would make an argument. I can't tell you with any certainty what I'm saying is the truth. I was raised in a Christian household, but I was very, very skeptical of any type of claim for God. It's only until recently that I would say that I'm warmed up for more both a philosophical and scientific explanation for God, but I can't say with any certainty that God is real. I'm just saying that this is a compelling argument for me as to why I think it could be plausible that he exists. But,
that's okay, Samuel. I just want to interrupt you again, just to clarify. Can we agree then, because I just want us to be on the same page, can we agree that regarding the point you made about love, that isn't evidence for God, because you've agreed with us, it does come from the physical, and this idea that the cyclical universe and Boltzmann's brains, these aren't actually, because Emma specifically asked you for the scientific evidence, these aren't in fact scientific evidence. These are things that you are convinced of, but the scientific evidence doesn't actually state that these things are true. It doesn't evidence them. Can we agree on those things? And then let's move on into the things that we can that talk about that may be compelling to us.
Oh no, they're definitely hypotheses, but I would say, for one, if we can get into it, I mean, the reason why I find those so compelling is the fact that it's not just the God, the gas, is that many of the interpretations relying on those things fit into like actual cosmology. The fact that, because for example, for the Big Bang, there is no starting. Each point of the universe has experienced the Big Bang. It's just the fact that there is no, how should I put it? There's no time before the Big Bang. Essentially, that all times, all clocks start there. And for me, I feel like that is proof that in the idea of simultaneity, if you know that, is both it's proven, and that's inherent to relativity. And for me, that's proof that time as a concept isn't as strict as what many lay people might assume to be about, the universe. That's
I'm just not sure,
to me.
Samuel, if I understand how your thoughts on the nature of time and cosmology relate to God. I mean, if we were going to have a properly link these ideas that you're talking about with God, we'd have to ask you to define what you're talking about when you say God anyway. Are you talking about a creator being, something that originated the universe? Are you talking about something that is somehow responsible for interacting with the nature of space-time? Or so I just wonder if there's a way you can succinctly sort of explain for us, so that we can have this conversation, what is the link between these cosmological and philosophical discussions and you thinking that is related to God, or some kind of argument for God? Because I'm a bit lost, to be honest.
Okay, then let me give a broad, and obviously, like I said, much of it is hypothesis, so you can feel free to say that the science isn't certain, and I would agree. So my view is that because time is infinite, quantum fluctuations will eventually produce something like a Boltzmann brain, and in my opinion, I would call that something like a God, if not God, and that I think
the brain you would call God, or the you would call that brain-like creation God, or you would call the events that facilitated that God? What is it you're calling God?
Well, I think God is the totality of the system, but I would think the brain is, in that situation, would be the entire system, because in that environment, especially once the heat death approaches, the heat death, I think, can never be completed, because there's no way for all energy to ever dissipate. Space-time itself has inherent energy, which is why quantum fluctuations, which is scientific, has been proven without a shadow of a doubt that over time, if it's possible for something to arise like a Boltzmann brain, it will inevitably arise. And because of that, I think our universe is something of a product of a previous Boltzmann brain, which I would call God.
That's first of all, it's a bit of a tautology to say that it's possible for something to arise, therefore it will arise. That's given. The thing I think I'm having trouble with is connecting the dots. In fact, a couple of things on this point. First of all, connecting the dots that it is possible to begin with. I don't think you've demonstrated that. And secondly, you jump in from this idea of a Boltzmann brain, which in the original formulation was the idea that a brain was created including memories, and this is how minds can form. It doesn't necessarily, even if a Boltzmann brain formed, it doesn't necessarily lend itself that it is a God, never mind a specific God. So it seems like there's a lot of dots you need to connect, which you're not currently connecting. I'm certainly having trouble with that. I think Emma's having a bit of trouble with that as well. All we're asking you to do is connect the dots for us. Walk us through the process of this is, I think a Boltzmann brain might be possible. I think it's possible because step A, B, and C. And I think that a Boltzmann brain is God. Walk us through the steps A, B, and C, and that God is a specific God. Walk us through the steps A, B, and C. Because all you're doing at the moment is saying, well, I think a Boltzmann brain can be created, and then I think that's God, and that created the universe. And you're not really showing us any of the working out. You're just telling us what you believe, and that's fine. That's what we're here for, to listen. But we want to know why you believe it. We want to work through that with you, rather than just having you tell us, because that's a bit boring. If I'm honest, from my point of view, I want to know why people are talking about it.
Yes, I mean, so I would say from the beginning, then, for quantum fluctuations, is that essentially, I don't want to give too much of a lay view, but the fact that literally at the fundamental reality, things pop in and out of existence. Would you agree that happens?
Yeah, I think that happens. Yeah, I think that's what the physics shows. I don't know about him. I don't know how much
I think the most accurate way that I've read my favorite physicist describe it is that that's what appears to be the case. From what we can see, I don't think it's totally accurate to say that is what happens. That's certainly an approximation from our view. But yes, I'm happy to go with that.
Yeah, fair point, fair clarification.
Yes, and through that, would you say that random fluctuation, if in an environment like the one described by the Big Bang, that a random fluctuation could have caused the Big Bang?
Now, this is where I'm getting confused, because you're saying in an environment like the Big Bang and could have caused the Big Bang. So you seem to be kind of like jumping backwards and forward time-wise here. What we know about the Big Bang, this precedes the Big Bang. The Big Bang is the process where we have this change of state. This is the name we give to it. I know you know this, Samuel. I'm explaining this to the audience. So the Big Bang is this change of state we have from where we have this infinitely hot and dense point, which is a singularity, Richard. Which a name I couldn't remember earlier. And this hot and dense point, for some reason, we don't know why, began to start cooling and expanding. In that cooling process, it began to expand, and that's how all the particles and everything formed. And it is this expansion process, this point where it cools and expands. We kind of put a demarcation line there, and we say this is called the Big Bang. This is time zero. This is where everything began. But before that, we don't actually know how the singularity came to be. And there are, as you say correctly, lots of theories about it. Some people connect these theories of things jumping up, appearing out of, and I'm going to be very careful here when I say this, nothing. It's not actually a nothing. It's a physical, it's a state of where particles jump out of like a kind of weird particle gravy, which doesn't exist but does exist at the same time. Physics is great, isn't it? And we have this, and these particles jump out of this. That's one, and one of the ideas about how the singularity started was that it was one of these particles that popped out of this weird gravy stew and suddenly formed our universe. And there might be, there are lots of hypotheses that say there might be many, many, many of these that happen all the time, that they might even happen within our own universe all the time and form new universes. And it's all lots of fun, but it is a hypothesis. We don't know that's how the universe started. Certain physicists, I think Lauren Krauss ascribes to this idea that, that's how the universe came about. And I think it's interesting, and these hypotheses are interesting, but it's even more interesting to me when you're ascribing, look, I believe in a God, and I believe in a God because of this, when it is a hypothesis and we don't actually know the answer. And this is why it's so important for me to ask you, how are you doing the work? Because you're describing one of many, many hypotheses. But yet again, if you forgive me, Samuel, you're not actually showing us you're working out. You're not saying, this is my preferred hypothesis because, and here is my reasoning. You're saying to us, this is my preferred hypothesis. And if you follow it down this line of lots of preferred hypothesi I have, then it is you get to God. But you're not showing us, she's still not showing us the working, and that's the really, really important part for us. And that's what we're just missing out from you, Samuel. So if I can really try and get you to zone in on giving us the working out, rather than just saying that, like, this hypothesis makes sense to me, this hypothesis is attractive to me. Can you kind of tell us why you think that hypothesis is the case, why it is your preferred hypothesis over the many, many others that are out there?
Yes, because I think over the span of what I think is infinity, because I do think infinity as a concept exists. I think mathematics deals with infinity all the time, and whether or not you think mathematics is real or to describe something, I do think things like calculus and even geometry, both. I'm humbled to say whether or not it proves, but it does. The fact that it often needs infinities in equations tells me that the concept of infinity does exist. And with that in mind, if that applies to something like time, whether or not I can say with certainty that it will eventually create something that I would call a god, that over time something like the Boltzmann braid would arouse, and because of that thing would become. I'm sorry, arise.
Sorry. No, sorry. It was too easy a target to let go unchallenged. Please continue, Samuel. Sorry, just ignore me.
I think he wants to experience love, so yeah, I think arouse is valid. But
comes full circle.
Boltzmann, it intersects with the philosophy that I think once that entity is created, the Boltzmann braid, it wants to simulate it's a self-existence essentially, and be able to feel what it's like to be a conscious agent. And in an environment like that, I think something like an ancestor simulation would help explain why something like the universe would come about. Essentially, it would create its own universe to be able to experience itself.
I'm going to pass you to Emma shortly to respond to you, Samuel. I'm just going to say before I do that, thank you for acknowledging that infinity is a thing. It's very nice to hear a theist say that, because so many pretend that it's not. And if you would like to debate William Lane Craig and correct his silly, foolish ass on this notion, please feel free to arrange one, and I will be watching it and in your corner all the way. But with that, I'm going to pass you over to Emma so she can respond to what you've said so far, and then we'll let you continue.
I'm happy with everything that you've said so far, Samuel. I'm still as like Richard, I'm still hung up on the why. You've said you think that this is a good. I just need to know why you think that a Boltzmann brain, is it? I'm not familiar with the concept, so if I'm misunderstanding it completely, you have to talk to me like I'm 5. I'm sorry. Why you think that relates to a creator in the sense that it would want to create, how what this theoretical simulated brain would want, and how that relates to there being a god. Because I feel like I could be on board with all these hypotheses, and maybe I would read a lot and these would be my favorite, and I still wouldn't have any faith in a god. So I'm just still getting a bit lost on kind of the basics, I think. That might be me just not understanding fully.
No. And also for your William Craig debate, if this is anything to go by, I would have to practice a lot not to be.
I don't think you would. I think you'd be all right, mate, to be honest, because he's a bit shit. He's not as good as everybody makes out.
But I would say I'm very much butchering, I think, the philosophy of a short story. Have you heard of The Egg?
I mean, that's a little bit vague. I've heard of eggs.
An egg.
Well, for the listeners hearing this, I would very much recommend reading it. I think it's a very beautiful short story about why God would make reality. And it's essentially the idea that he wants to replicate himself, create another entity similar to him, which is why I think something like the Garden of Eden is allegorical. I don't know if I'm breaking with, major Christian doctrine, but I think the idea that it was a mistake for us to eat the tree is, apologies for my language, utter bullcrap. I think he wants us to experience the very nature of being alive, which includes both love and pain. And the idea that things like us learning to become more compassionate with one another, despite our animalistic tendencies, is the entire point. Our ability to overcome hardship is why we have to be in a universe filled with death and pain. I don't know why people make so much fuss about sin. I think sin, it's what we needed to hear at the time of the message, because a lot of people, I think, are really much oriented towards an authoritative figure telling them what they have to do rather than given them a good explanation as to why they should do it innately. But to me, the reason why the Boltzmann brain is appealing is that the fact that within the short story, essentially, it's about him wanting to come closer to his creation by making us go through a very active existence, which includes all of the human emotions, all of our struggles, all of our pain, so that we can come closer to him eventually.
Doesn't this kind of
the main purpose?
I feel like, Samuel, I know you said that you've you sort of did a lot of reading and philosophizing that brought you to more of a theistic perspective. But I do wonder if you have to start here with a presupposition that God exists and that you have an idea of what he wants. And because for me as a person who has no relationship with the God concept, there's nothing to link this nice story or what sounds like if I was going to be a Christian, I'd probably be on board with your philosophy. I like the sound of it, but because I like the sound of it doesn't mean that I think it's true. So I'm just losing where it's just because we sort of were drawn in because there was an idea of like evidence, and just an idea of like, this is why I'm compelled to believe in God. But it feels like you have to believe in God at the start for your ideas to make sense. Did that make any sense?
No, absolutely. And for full clarity, I would say I did have, a supernatural visitation, but my thing is I don't believe anyone should believe my anecdote. I think anecdotes are terrible evidence. So if I would say that I had something like that, I don't expect either of you to believe that. I would say this is somewhat of a post hoc rationalization as to why that experience was as powerful as it was. Mm-hmm. But to me, I think a big view on my idea of God is that fact that it's not coercive, essentially that you don't have to necessarily believe God is there. Because my thing is, I think it's like an experiment almost. The laboratory doesn't want to tamper with the results too much. Otherwise, what's the point of running the experiment for me? Like, I don't want to taint my results. Otherwise, the entire point is fruitless. So I think for me, my idea of God is something that is passive in the way he interacts with the world. I think he wants us to. I'm sorry.
Sorry, you can finish. You can finish your point, Samuel. You go ahead.
Yes, like the passivity of him essentially giving out edicts is something that human religions falter with, because I think all human religions are somewhat true. It's just the fact that because people value tribal instincts over a lot of things, they hyper focus on certain bits of truth and then they put human, faults within them. Like, for example, I think a lot of the 10 Commandments are true, but some of them I don't think are true. I think some of them are just what humans at the time put in order to make sure that they can maintain power. I think that
I am gonna cut in because I feel like we're gonna go off on big old tangents, and I think we've kind of got to the crux of it, which I did a video a little while ago. I don't know if anybody watching saw it, but it was 10 reasons I'm not a Christian in response to the question, why aren't you a Christian? And one of my given reasons is that most of the time when I talk to somebody who has evidence and compelling reasoning, it turns out after a long-winded discussion, no offense, Samuel, I do think it's been very interesting and you've been very nice with interesting ideas, but it tends to boil down to, I had a religious experience or I was brought up Christian, or, something that is anecdotal. And like you said accurately, we can all agree, isn't evidence. It's not going to change my mind or Richard's mind. And I don't think there's anywhere really else we can move with this. You've got some interesting ideas. To you, they say God is real. To me, they have nothing to do with God. And the conversation, I think, just is going to be cyclical after this point, because I don't think we can relate to each other.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I wasted your time. I just wanted to give what
You've not wasted our time at all.
Not at all.
No, you've not wasted our time at all. And Samuel, you've been greatly respectful, and I've thoroughly enjoyed having the conversation with you. I do want you to call back, and believe it or not, I actually want to discuss the religious experience. There's this kind of experience you had, because I want you to walk through the actual experience and what is compelling about it for you, and see if we can work together to try and untangle that web and see why it's not compelling for us, why it's compelling for you. See if we can reach some kind of ground where we can agree on it. In the meantime, I'm going to do a secular rarity and give you some homework. I don't usually do this for people, but I have thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with you. And we didn't quite get to everything I would have liked to have got to in the time we've had. I want you to kind of, if you haven't already, I want you to go away and read up on Bertrand Russell's kind of objections to the perfect Platonic realm, because it has some really, really good objections to it. And if you haven't read them already, please go and read them. Him and other philosophers. There are some quite major flaws with it, so it'd be good for you. I keep glancing up because I keep forgetting his name, and I've got his History of Western Philosophy sat on my bookshelf just up to my left, so I keep up just to remind me of what he's called. But if you read up on some of Bertrand Russell and other people's objections to the perfect Platonic realm, because some of them are quite compelling, if you can give us a call next time, please do. I'm going to let you go, but if you can give us a call next time, let's please discuss your experience and walk through it.
Yes, I will do. Thank you so much.